about him. But really this affair with Jacob began for me, I would say 8 years ago. I was in my second year of seminary, and they gave us this assignment. They said that you were supposed to go for a preaching class. They said, go to the Old Testament, pick an Old Testament story, and preach a narrative sermon. And there were two problems with that assignment. The first was there are a whole lot of stories in the Old Testament to choose from. But there aren't a whole lot of good stories in the Old Testament in terms of like great, upstanding, moral characters. There's a whole lot of things that maybe you wouldn't ever want to preach on in the Old Testament. The second problem with that was that nobody in the class, myself included, had any idea what a narrative sermon was. We're supposed to find a story and preach a sermon that we didn't know what that was. And so I started with a very kind of spiritual and technical practice of just flipping through my Bible trying to find something. And so, naturally I started with Genesis, the first book. I'm flipping through, and some of those stories are pretty familiar. They're not really saying anything new to me. And I get to Jacob's story, and I knew Jacob's story about the stew and the wives and the wrestling with God. I knew Jacob's story. I mean, I grew up in church. I know those things. And so I start to read it, and then I'm reading it a little bit deeper, and I'm hearing it, I would say, for the first time. Really reading the details of Jacob's life before God and God's life through Jacob for the first time. And I remember I got to the end of Jacob's story. It's like 25 chapters after it started. And I remember just sitting there, absolutely stunned. I remember thinking to myself that this story is the only story I tell for the rest of my life. And if I tell it well, then it'll be a life well lived. So I've spent some years trying to tell that story in different ways, in a sermon here, and a sermon there, and a word here, and a word there. But this study, for better or worse, is my most comprehensive effort to tell again this incredible story. I'm going to mix in with it some of my story, hopefully some of all of our story. And a piece of that is I have 4 kids. A lot of you know this. My third child, Josiah, is 2.5, and he's a 2.5-year-old. And he, I guess a few months ago, it was in the Nehemiah study, Kelly Minter says about her sister. She says, my sister came out of the womb and looked at the world and said, I've got this. That's Josiah. Maybe you know a kid like that. Well, we've been working on our table manners some, loosely speaking. And so one of the rules is that when you are done eating, if you're allowed to be done eating, you've eaten enough or we've given up, then you are excused from the table. You have to leave the room. You can't stay in there because then, of course, everybody else gets riled up and distracted from their eating. And so Josiah, this particular night, was done eating, and he had been excused from the table. And I heard him. He started to go upstairs. Not always going upstairs to play, it's relatively safe. But a little bit later, I hear his voice, and he's yelling for his father. But I said, I think that's Josiah. Maybe he's stuck somewhere or something. And so I start up the stairs, and about halfway up the stairs, I hear water running. And so I run the rest of the way up the stairs, and I get to the door of our upstairs bathroom, and we have forayed some into cloth diapering. And if you want a cloth diaper, just, tips out there, then you want to buy a spray hose to hook up to your toilet. And this is for the obvious reason of spraying poo. I feel like there are 2 realms in my life. There's this realm over here where I talk a lot about Jesus. That's like my job life. And there's this realm over here that has a lot to do with poop. Okay? So we're kind of blending these two here. So there he is, and he's got the diaper sprayer. And the diaper sprayer is like really high powered. Sometimes you need that, if you know what I mean. And the unfortunate thing about our diaper sprayer is that every once in a while it gets stuck on. And so you can picture little Josiah there, and he's just screaming. And there's water running down the walls, running. Rivers all over the tile. The shower curtain is dripping. He's dripping. The sink, the whole vanity area. I mean, it's just soaked in there. And I get to the door of the bathroom, and he's holding this. And he turns to me, and I'm like, trying to go out of the way, trying to get around him, right, and finally turn it off. And he cries for like another 3 or 4 minutes, absolutely terrified by this experience with the diaper sprayer. And the thing is that we did get it cleaned up. And so I look back at this and I think, you know what? Sometimes you just never know what you're going to get a hold of. And to me that applies to this Bible study. Not simply for the effect of this study on the last month of my life, although as I said, that's been kind of extensive. I perhaps exaggerated how much I had done when I proposed the study to Belinda. Oh yeah, I just need to put like a little bit on paper. Well, there's all 140 pages of my little bit on paper. But I had like ate, slept, and breathed Jacob for the last 6 weeks. Not a whole lot of sleeping him, actually, but a lot of eating and breathing Jacob. And it's probably gotten to the point, like I said, where Josh was just like really sick of hearing that. He has been, so here's, I'm going to say something nice. This is to make up for all the other funny stories I'll tell about him later. He has been, just far and away the biggest blessing. He has been encouraging. He has been supportive. He has been tough when I just need to go get some work done. And he has been a great listener when I just wanted to talk about this Jacob story. And but it kind of just seeps into your whole subconscious. And so I remember one time Josh was telling me, we were kind of catching up on our day, and he said, oh, do I remember to tell you that they think he has a brother named Jacob? They think Jacob tore his ACL. I'm not kidding you. I thought, no, the text say it was his hip. It was not his knee at all. And then I was like, oh, wait, he's talking about his brother. I tried to express some compassion and things. I'm not real good at that in the best circumstances. You probably had that experience with me. If you've been talking to me over the last month, I might have had this glazed expression because I was really and I'm thinking about Jacob in the middle of the fields of Gideon or something. So I apologize for that. But it's been kind of all-consuming. But what I mean when I say that you don't always know what you're going to get a hold of is that this story has turned out to be even huger than I imagined it to be. This story about Jacob's life is much bigger than Jacob's life. It is a story at the very base level about Jacob. But it's also a story about us. And it's a story about who God is. And I think that really those are the three elements of any good Bible story, that we come to the biblical text, we approach it, and we look at it and we say, what is the story? What is the text itself that's before us? And then there's a second layer that goes on top of it, and we have to ask ourselves, what does this story tell me about who I am? And then there's that third level, what does this story tell me about who God is? And those three elements of our biblical study twist together, they intertwine. And so it's not a linear progression that the Bible and life hardly ever is, right? But they twist together, and we learn from one about the other, and from the other about the first, and somehow come away from it knowing a little bit more of the truth that God has for us to know. And so the study we're embarking on today has those kind of three elements. You can see it reflected in the subtitle. This is going to be a study of Jacob. It's going to be a study of our striving. And it's going to be a study of the sufficiency of God's grace. Those three elements, the text, ourselves, and our God. And so that first part is, it's going to be a study of Jacob. Jacob is the third generation of the family of promise. The family of promise begins, of course, with Abraham, where God chooses an individual, and then by extension his whole family to bless, and through whom to bless the world. God chooses this family of promise. He makes extravagant promises to them, and then we see them fulfilled over the course of generations. Jacob's story begins in Genesis 25. He's born in Genesis 25, and he's not buried until Genesis 50, which means that Jacob's story spans 25 chapters of Genesis. A full half of the book of Genesis includes Jacob's story. Now, of course, some of those, after about chapter 36, you get into the stories of Jacob's children. But all through those stories, even of Joseph, you see Jacob. He reappears. He's still the patriarch of this family. You see him grieving the loss of his son Jacob. And so Jacob permeates the story all the way through for 25 chapters. And I know you're thinking, wow, we got a lot of work ahead of us. But I don't think it's going to feel like work. This story is, it's like great soap opera material, right? You have deception, you have arguments, you have family conflict, you have reconciliation, you have a little bit of sex here and there, you have violence, you have just life, and every element of life through the lens of Jacob's life. And there's a lot of drama. If you like drama, you have come to the right story. But it's not just a story. It's the story. It's God's biblical story, which is our story. Jacob, I don't think this is giving too much away, Jacob becomes Israel. And Israel becomes not just the name for Jacob the individual, but the name for an entire nation. And so Jacob the individual whom God chooses becomes the nation Israel whom God chooses to work in and through for the blessing of his whole creation. And this story of Israel's life, this nation's life before God, their struggle, their sin, their repentance, God's redeeming and reclaiming of them, that pervades the entire Old Testament into the New Testament, where we hear that we as Christians are grafted into the nation Israel. Which means that we are Israel, as much as Jacob was Israel. 1 Peter 2:9 says that we are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation. That ups the ante a little bit for this Jacob story, because if Jacob is Israel and Israel is us, then Jacob is us. And the thing is that as we get deeper into the Jacob story, you're going to, I guarantee, you're going to see glimpses of yourself when you look at Jacob. You might notice Josh set up a video for me. That's because my mom wanted to see it, and because some of you said, well, what if I'm gone a week and you actually say something that's really valuable and I don't want to miss it? So there's a video camera, and I am perfectly happy to let any of you who want to watch it. I am not going to watch it. I mean, maybe like you guys really enjoy seeing a video of yourself, and that's fun, and maybe like when I'm really old, it'll be nice to see and reflect on, like, I don't know what. But I'm not going to watch. I hate to watch myself on video, right? It makes you really uncomfortable, right? If I watch this video, I'd be like, wow, I chose those shoes. Do I really do that with my mouth like all the time? Really? Like, and my ballet directors were right. My hands look like bird claws, right? And the bird might be having a seizure. I'm not entirely sure. So I'm not going to watch the video, because seeing ourselves makes us uncomfortable, doesn't it? We don't always like what we see. So I want to warn you that in this Jacob story, we're going to see ourselves, and it might make us a little bit uncomfortable. I mentioned around the tables that, Jacob's maybe not like the most upstanding citizen in the world, not a man of great character. And you might get into the story and think, gosh, it seems like, there was a lot of like nice people in the Bible. Like, there was Jesus. He was nice, right? We could have studied him. The truth is that there aren't a whole lot of great people in the Bible, because the people in the Bible are people. And so they're a lot like us, and they mess things up, and sometimes they get it right, and then they probably are going to mess it up again. So we're going to see in Jacob, we're going to see someone who is always grabbing for more, someone who's sneaky, who's deceptive, someone who's self-centered. We're going to see someone who is not all that likable. And chances are we aren't going to like him. We aren't going to like who he is. We're not going to like how he acts. We're not going to like how he treats people. But the bottom line is, at least for me, we're not going to like the self we see in Jacob. Like him or not, we're going to have to get to know him. It's absolutely essential that we know at a very deep level this Jacob story, because knowing the Jacob story is the only way that we can know the God of Jacob. 22 times in the Bible, God is referred to as the God of Jacob. And a few of those times it's in the course of that whole phrase, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, da-da-da-da-da. But 15 times God is simply called the God of Jacob. More times than he's called the God of anybody else, except for the God of Israel, which of course is sort of an extension of the God of Jacob. It's a very specific description of who God is. Because when you refer to the God of Jacob, you're not referring to the God as revealed in his creative power. You're not referring to the God as revealed in his delivering might. You're not referring to the God as revealed in his infinite holiness. You're referring to the God as revealed in the life of this man called Jacob. The God who is specifically and intimately revealed in and through Jacob. 12 of the times that the Bible uses the term the God of Jacob come in the Psalms. And it's really telling to me because we don't know who all the Psalms are written by. A lot of them are written by David. I might choke myself here. A lot of Psalms are written by David, and we know a lot, right, about what David was like. He was human, like most of us. And so it strikes me that David, in his most intimate moments before the Lord, David, recognizing who he was and how he was, said to God, called on the God of Jacob. Because don't we, in our most desperate moments, need a God like the God of Jacob, a God who embraces the one who isn't that likable, the one who manages to use the one who isn't that lovable? Don't we desperately need to know the God of Jacob, that we might cry out to him? I want you to turn to Psalm 24 for one of these examples. This is just so something besides the first 10 pages of your Bible get worn out in this study, because mine are a little bit wrinkly. Psalm 24 says, "The earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all who live in it. For he founded it upon the seas and established it upon the waters. Who may ascend to the hill of the Lord? Who may stand in his holy place? He who has clean hands and a pure heart, who does not lift up his soul to an idol or swear by what is false. He will receive blessing from the Lord and vindication from God his Savior. Such is the generation of those who seek him, who seek your face, O God of Jacob. Lift up your heads, O you gates, be lifted up, you ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in." Who is this King of glory? The Lord strong and mighty, the Lord mighty in battle. Lift up your heads, O you gates, lift them up, you ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in. Who is he, this King of glory? The Lord Almighty. He is the King of glory. If we're going to seek the King of glory, if we're going to know and experience God in all his glory and might and power in our lives, then we're going to have to be a generation that seeks the face of the God of Jacob. So we're going to have to know who Jacob is. One of the things, as I mentioned, that we're going to see about Jacob that we're probably not going to like a whole bunch is that Jacob's a striver. Jacob always wants a little bit more, a little bit better than he has. And the reason I think that we are uncomfortable with this, of course, is that it hits a little bit close to home. The message that is always before us, imposed by our culture, imposed by our past, imposed by the people around us, imposed sometimes just by our inner self, the message that is always before us, either implicitly or explicitly, is that we have to have more. We have to do more, we have to get more, we have to know more, we have to give more, we have to achieve more, we have to be more. And it's a daily battle that we have to push back against the impulse for more. And if we're going to fight that battle successfully, then we have to be honest with ourselves about what our more is. I think that it's sometimes a little bit too easy to dismiss, because we begin to think of the more as something material, more stuff. And we do have that impulse, don't we? It's hard to walk into Target and not want just a little bit more, right? More things, more of this something new, the more. And so we push back against that. We say, well, you know, I've been able to hold strong against that impulse for more. But then there are the surface mores that we all want, right? More time, more sleep, more chocolate, more fun. And then there is a deeper more that probably motivates all those other mores in our life. Because discontent and desire can take any number of forms. We have deeper mores. I don't know what yours are. A lot of times still discovering what mine are. Your more might be appreciation. Are you hungry to have someone recognize you? Maybe your more is the admiration of others. Maybe your more is approval. If you could just have this person's approval. Maybe this person's too. Maybe your more is comfort. You could just feel more secure. What's your more? What's pushing you? What's driving you at the deepest level? What are you striving for? One of my prayers in this study is that we might examine our own striving. We might at least begin to understand what the more we desire is. Because if we do not know what our more is, then we will never be able to fight against that. What's your more? Another thing that this Jacob story is going to have you saying is, it's not fair. Of course, kids say this all the time. Like from their very youngest age, they begin to notice discrepancies in the world around them, right? Somebody else gets a bigger piece of cake. It's not fair. Someone gets to go to school or someone gets to stay home from school. Both of them. It's not fair. Someone goes to timeout and somebody doesn't. It's not fair. Somebody has to get out of the bath first, regardless of the fact that everybody is going to get out of the bath, and it's not fair, right? Somebody else has a toy they want, and they look at it and they think, they say, it's not fair. Children are always noticing these discrepancies or seeing something that's unequal in their lives, and they're going to tell you about it. It's one of the most exasperating things about parenting is this somehow attempt to make everything perfectly fair just so you don't have to hear about it, right? You don't really care if it's fair, but you don't want to hear about it. There's an obsession with fairness for children. Thank goodness adults don't do that, right? I mean, we don't look at what someone else has and stomp our feet and say it's not fair. We don't look at someone else's experience or element or blessing of their life and say it's not fair, do we? Have you ever seen what someone else has up against what you have and thought, that's not fair? We do it with surface things. Why doesn't my hair look like that? That's not fair. Mm-hmm. Why does she always look so put together? It's not fair. What a beautiful home. It's not fair. They could afford to redo their kitchen. It's not fair. And that's bad enough. But it creeps into bigger things too, doesn't it? The really big things. Why did I lose my job? Why is my marriage falling apart? Why is my child sick? Why can I get pregnant? Why is my mom dying of cancer? These are the why me questions. And they cry out from the depth of who we are, not in a self-pity kind of way, but in real consternation. It's not fair. Because deep down, or We're not that far from our children, are we? And if we aren't as likely to voice that that's not fair, it's just because we're used to it. But we still feel it, don't we? Doesn't it still whisper in our hearts? It's not fair. A friend of mine has a really bright little boy, and she tells this story from when he was like 2.5 years old. She said to him, I want to get this right. Guess what, Sam? I have something special for us to share. She saw this as an opportunity to teach him about sharing. It's a good time, 2.5 years old. Sam says, what is it? I will tell you in a minute, but it's something we have to share. Okay? Okay. It's the chocolate chip cookie. Yay! I don't want to share. Sam, there's only one cookie, so we need to share it. But I don't want to share it. Well, if you're not willing to share, then neither of us will get to have the cookie. But it's hard to share. It is hard to share. Both of us want the cookie, and so we will need to share. But I don't know how to share. Well, she sees her opening. This will be good practice. I know. We can share the cookie. I will have the really big part, and you can have the very small part. No, I would like to split it evenly. I will share the really little part with you. Sam, when I was a little girl, Grandma taught me something about sharing. What was it? Grammy said that if I ever have a cookie and I have a friend nearby, I should break it in half and offer them the bigger piece. And Sam answered immediately, okay, so you break it in half and I can have the bigger piece. The funny thing about fair is that most of us don't mind unfair as long as it's in our favor, right? Imagine a room full of children and a bag full of lollipops. You pass out a lollipop to every kid. They're going to be so excited about that lollipop until you get to the last kid and you just give them the whole rest of the bag. And every child in that room is going to scream out, that's not fair, except for the boy holding the bag. We only mind unfair when it's not in our favor. Because what we want is not actually fair. What we want is more. We want the better than fair. Turn to Matthew's Gospel, chapter 20. Probably heard this story before. Jesus tells him a story, verses 1 through 16. The kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire men to work in his vineyard. He agreed to pay them a denarius for the day and sent them into his vineyard. About the third hour he went out and saw others standing in the marketplace doing nothing. He told them, you also go and work in my vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right. So they went. He went out again about the 6th hour and the 9th hour and did the same thing. About the 11th hour he went out and found still others standing around. He asked them, why have you been standing here all day doing nothing? Because no one has hired us, they answered. He said to them, you also go and work in my vineyard. When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, call the workers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last ones hired and going on to the first. The workers who were hired about the 11th hour came and each received a denarius. So when those who came who were hired first, they expected to receive more. When they received it, they began to grumble against the landowner. These men who were hired last worked only 1 hour, they said, and you have made them equal to us, who have borne the burden of the work in the heat of the day. But he answered one of them, friend, am I not being unfair to you? Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? Take your pay and go. I want to give the man who was hired the last the same as I gave you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Or are you envious because I am generous? So the last will be first, and the first will be last. So there they are, and they've worked the whole day. in the heat of the day, from the very beginning to the very end. And when it comes time to pay, and they get the same amount as the person who just worked the last 45 minutes. I would have been right with him. That's not fair at all. It's not fair. They were hungry for something fair. Sometimes I eat by process of elimination. And maybe you do this. Usually it's like maybe late at night, and I'm hungry, and I go into the kitchen and I'll stand there like in front of the pantry or in front of the fridge, and I'll think, hungry. Maybe I'll have some yogurt. And I'll eat the yogurt. Still hungry. I'll open the pantry, maybe some pretzels. Still hungry. Actually, that's a lie. I'll stay in the kitchen, and I'll think I'm hungry. That chocolate truffle will do it. I'll eat the chocolate truffle, but I'll still be hungry. Maybe, and I'll look in the pantry, potato chips. I'll eat some potato chips, so I'll still be hungry. Usually I move on into the ice cream. And I may not have ever found what I was looking for, but I usually have the wisdom to stop at some point. This is eating by process of elimination. You're hungry, you're just not quite sure what you're hungry for, and you try all kinds of other things, and you're still hungry. There's something more. I'm hoping that for all of us, this Bible study will be a little bit like eating by process of elimination. Not for our physical hunger, but for our heart deep spiritual hunger. That we're going to have the opportunity to consider what our real more is. What it is that we are striving for at the deepest level. That we might know what we're really hungry for. The landowner says to them, "How am I being unfair? I gave you exactly what I said I would give you. Isn't it my right to be generous, to be extravagantly kind to those who came last?" The landowner says to his workers, God says to us, can't I be gracious beyond any reason, beyond any fairness? And maybe if we get that, we don't go away hungry anymore. Because in the end, it's not fairness we want. It's something better than fair. The troubling, disconcerting, subversive, but always good news of the Jacob story is that God chose Jacob. God chose us. Because rather than fairness, God chose grace. Let's pray. God, you know us. You know better than we do what we're hungry for. Lord, I ask that you would gift us with a hunger for you. That we might stand in the kitchen of our lives looking around and finally find what we've been seeking, what we've been striving for in you. God, you are a God of extravagant grace, and so we give you praise in these and in all things. For you, the God of Jacob, you're so good.